My name is Quinn Gormley. I'm with Cohen Resnick. I'm a director of consulting. Joining me up here today is Drew Foster, sitting to my left. Drew is with Redstone Equity Partners. Been with them for quite some time, but been in the affordable housing industry for about 12 years. He's the director of acquisitions, has seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. Drew has pretty much all of his career has been in investment of tax-oriented investments, working on historic tax credits and LIHTC. Right next to him is Thomas Paramore. Don't know much about Tom, but he is a good drinker. He loves to eat. Fun guy to be around. Thomas is with Boston Financial. Been there for quite some time. Been in the affordable housing business for quite some time. I've known him probably a good 12, 13 years. I first met Thomas when he was doing bond structuring and financial advising. So he's got a wealth of knowledge on multiple sides of the transaction. And then right next to him is Scott Puffer with Gardner Capital. Scott is Senior Vice President of Development with Gardner Capital. He's worked on affordable housing deals, market rate deals, senior living deals, mixed finance deals, mixed income deals. Anything I say, Scott will nod his head and say yes. That's why he's a good developer, as you can kind of tell. So with that, I'll kind of turn it over to Drew really quick, and maybe want to talk a little bit about Redstone, what you guys do and specialize in, that type of thing. So.
Sure. Redstone was founded just before the markets collapsed in 2007. It was timely.
Planning.
Couldn't have been planned better. We are an offspring of a few of the larger, let's say, what is RBC today, formerly Apollo Housing Capital. A couple of our founders had decided that they wanted to do something a little bit smaller, more ownership-centric, and founded Redstone in 2007, and we have grown from what was 4 original employees to just over 50 today. We are working in 40-plus states, primarily tax credit syndication in the LIHTC space, and do a little bit in the solar space as well, primarily in North Carolina. I've been with the firm for a little over 4 years, and I primarily focus on Texas and the Gulf states, as well as New England. So I guess in tax credit speak, the bifurcated region, or the bipolar region, which I like to call it sometimes. But happy to be here.
Yeah. And Tom's a little bit about Boston Financial. I know you guys are growing and things are getting good. So.
Sure, thanks, Quinn. Yeah, so Boston Financial, like Redstone, we are a syndicator of tax credits, and we focus almost exclusively on housing tax credits. If there are other credits involved on a housing deal, we'll do those as well. Based in Boston, obviously, we've got offices in Louisville, which is where I'm based, Los Angeles, and then a couple of satellite offices around the country. Boston Financial started in the 60s doing tax syndication deals. When the credit program was created in '86, they got into this business, and have done quite a bit. I'd say probably 1,900 properties we've done within the LIHTC space, 170,000 units at the peak. So we're currently sort of burning off. We're probably selling 100 deals a year out of the portfolio, and I'm doing my best to replace those. So I cover the middle of the country, follow my clients wherever they go, and try to help them out as far as putting together their deals. As Quinn said, my background originally was on the bond side, so I do quite a bit of 4% business as well, and sort of try to help as an advisor as well as those deals are becoming more and more common as the 9% credit has gotten to be so competitive. So really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and look forward to talking with you all.
Cool. Scott, I know you're working on closing deals and working on keeping your sanity, which sometimes is kind of difficult to do, but thank you for being here, and tell us a little about Gardner.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So Gardner Capital is a 20-plus year organization, historically based in Missouri, and did development in a couple states. In the last 5 years, we've grown our platform to, we're active in about 15 states right now, We have 3 businesses. One is state tax credit syndication. One is development, so I'll be speaking from the developer's perspective. And the last is solar development and ownership, large-scale solar projects, so that doesn't really apply. But those are our 3 lines of business, and happy to be here, keep these guys straight.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and just again, this panel is about the invisible details, kind of a compliance panel largely built around, the deal structuring, deal requirements, that type of deal. I didn't give these guys a lot of lead time, so, I was going to say this is actually kind of a syndication developer exercise in creativity. But also it may turn into UFC 200.5. So depending on how we get into these deal structures. So if you're looking for the RAD panel, it's next door. So just one last kind of comment about that. All right, so we'll get into the details here. So as you guys know, the majority of deals start off, applying for tax credits, and I think we were going to make this panel, originally we were going to call it, I'll water it down a little bit, but it was like, oh crap, I got credits now, what do I do? Yeah. So we're going to kind of start off from the standpoint of you're now pushing, you got your allocation, you're pushing for a carryover, and you're going to go down that road. So with that, looking at the carryover package, in Texas you have to submit a package. They don't necessarily go off the application, so they're looking for updates. So Scott, one of the things I was thinking about was, what is the current status of a deal when you're looking at the carryover package? How fluid is it? What's you're still looking at changes?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we look at this period in the first 3 months after an award as sort of a dance. You're dancing with your numbers, you're dancing with your design team, with your contracting team. You're refining with what little information you had before award. You obviously, information costs money, and at this point, you're into pre-development, starting to pay your design team and really get your contractors engaged. You're starting to entertain syndicators and lenders, and so you've got a lot going on while you're trying to refine the numbers. Everything's in flux, and I think it's again, to me, it's not until after about 3 months after award when you've really got the design team re-engaged and you've got the contracting team really looking at the numbers closely. Do you have anything? But as we've seen, carryover doesn't wait. So
yeah. And with those changes, some of the challenges are communicating the changes effectively, without tripping a wire or causing an issue at the state agency. So, and I've been around you working with state agencies, a very effective communicator, but some of those skills that you have, obviously is important. How do you communicate that stuff to the agency?
Yeah, it's important to interact frequently but decisively. We try not to reach out to our agencies without additional information. In other words, we don't want to just represent what we presented last time. We want to have finer numbers, schedules. So, it's important to communicate. Some states have monthly status reports that we fill out. Other states, it's more of an ad hoc communication process, but we really try to reach out and let them know where we are in the process, even if the answer is we're not there yet.
Yeah. And Thomas and Drew, I know, Scott mentioned you're a little early in the process, kind of at that carryover package, not necessarily the carryover agreement scenario, but are you guys pretty hands-on with your developers when they're looking at doing the carryover and kind of helping them make those, operating expense analysis, even though you may not have got your due diligence completed at that time, but where are you guys at that kind of role?
Sure. Yeah. And real quick, maybe before I get into that, just so we know sort of who the audience is here, how many of you all are sort of involved on the development side and are actually, doing these deals? So, okay, so we got a couple folks that have actually sort of been through the process, and then asset management or compliance. Okay, good. Yeah. So obviously you all have different roles in this, and I think maybe we can tailor our
Yeah, absolutely.
the content appropriately. But I think to get back to your question, as far as our involvement at the carryover stage, we understand that things are moving, and so we want to, with our partners, we want to try to be flexible and provide them the information that they need. But understanding, like Scott said, I mean, things are still coming together. We've had something on paper that we know what the deal looks like, and we want to try to stay true to that, but we also want to have that flexibility to sort of meet the deadlines that that the agency has, and so we're there sort of as a supporting role, providing that information. If you need a draft partnership agreement, obviously it helps if we've done deals previously. It's pretty easy to dust one of those off and redline something and get that put together for you. But providing letters, working with you to fine tune the numbers and the pro formas, to get those in a timely manner. That's really our role, I would say, at the carryover stage.
I saw one developer raise their hand, and I saw one management person raise their hand. Anybody in here from the IRS? Okay, so we're good. All right, so let's talk a little bit about that application cycle is kind of indigenous to Texas, but other states kind of deal with the carryover package in many different ways. But then you kind of move over to the actual carryover agreement, which the IRS really recognizes as the only document that is the true allocation document to the developer, and so everybody kind of relies on that document. What you got to remember is there are a lot of moving parts to those carryover agreements. They have to have specific things within the carryover agreement. And talking with Scott a little bit, what are the things that you guys kind of look at, post-mortem of the issuance of the carryover agreement? You get enough time to kind of look at it and say, this is right, wrong, because you can get caught in the woods if you don't have it right. So.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's as a developer, I know what I don't know, and this is the area where we really lean on the accountants and the people who do these carryovers very often to guide us and advise us.
Yeah, and Drew, what kind of carryovers are really kind of indigenous to tax credit 9% competitive type deals, but similarly, bond deals have kind of a start and then kind of an in-between to the application and then inducement resolution. Can you begin your process at inducement resolution, or are you waiting until 42M to kind of get the?
Yeah, we typically really want to get engaged early, well before inducement, and in a bond deal, you have a pretty good sense of how how your projected credits are going to kind of turn out. So we tend to use that as sort of as a ballpark or a target, and then we'll make the adjustments when the 42M comes in. But I think it's for us, we certainly don't want to be brought in late in the game, especially if there are going to be any changes to the deal structure, and we want to make sure we can have our tax attorneys take a close look at some items if that comes into play. But by waiting, you can only run into conflicts that may end up affecting the structure and putting the credits at risk. So.
Right. Yeah, and at risk of, I don't want to turn this into a bond panel, but Thomas, you've been on that side. You've seen trying to get all the trains on the same track type thing. So, there's other players involved once you get 42M before you actually kind of get into the analysis. So, what are their kind of roles, like bond counsel and so on and so forth, in kind of pushing to the credits?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and that's that's part of the challenge of when you introduce a 4% deal into the equation is the 9% deals, they're complicated enough, and you have enough parties involved. When you're going to the 4% arena, you've got the issuer, their counsel, you've got bond counsel, you've got the underwriter, their counsel, you've got trustee, and it's really trying to get all of those parties on the same page, and they may not, sometimes on the bond side they don't understand or appreciate everything sort of on the equity side, and vice versa. So I think communication is key. Early on, communicating with our client, communicating with the folks on the debt side, and making sure that everybody's expectations are appropriate as far as timing. And you've got certain deadlines as far as meeting dates that you have to adhere to on the bond side. And really, we try to be in a position that, the 42M is kind of the last, piece that we're waiting on. And so that's kind of the last piece to come in. And once we get the 42M, it's like, okay, let's get to the closing table.
Yeah, so again, to kind of separate out the two, on bond transactions, the 42M is similarly kind of like the carryover agreement. It qualifies as a project. It's a statement from the state agency that's responsible for credits, stating that the project could qualify for tax credits, meeting certain guidelines requirements, where the carryover agreement is actually an agreement that's dealing with the credit authority that the state has. So I want to show you that those are kind of like the starting points of kind of how we kind of go through this. Scott, do you make any strategic arrangements when looking at or requesting building identification numbers? That's part when you move from carryover?
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a little thought, and obviously there's a bit of art involved. I've done that by floor. I've done that by building. We've done combination rehab, new construction, where we've had to split that up into separate bins. Also, in a multiple building scenario, I would absolutely suggest, multiple bins.
Yeah.
I've done a couple by unit, which the state agencies love that. When you've got 120 units and each one has an individual bin. So, yeah.
Yeah, it makes it, they don't ever run out of bins, but they really enjoy giving you one for every unit. So, yeah, and Drew, does a limited partner play a role in that when you're looking at the deal?
I think the limited partner tends to get involved in this when you have a tricky structure, when you've got market rate component, a single building where we have placed in service deadlines that we have to be cognizant of. There's a reason for us to have a concern that credit delivery could be at risk, then we do tend to get heavily involved. And I would definitely encourage any of you that run into this situation to speak with your counsel and bring in a limited partner early on in this discussion, because I did have a situation where this was being proposed by a developer on a historic adaptive reuse project. This was in northern Louisiana, actually, and they had done it previously where they did separate bins for each floor, and my tax counsel on this project was not comfortable with that. They wanted to see certain structural components that would kind of help solidify the tax opinion on that, which this building was not set up for. So there are circumstances where it may not be as simple as just picking numbers and being okay with from an accounting standpoint.
Yeah.
There are a lot of tax implications that are important to factor in as well.
Yeah. Scott, we had talked a little bit about the general contractor too. He plays a role in that, and trying to figure out what their delivery is. And you kind of hinted on that when you talked about the safety and the building issues, but
yeah, absolutely. And it's a bit of a dance with your local city too. You've got to get a temporary C of O before you can move anyone in that case as well. I mean, the bin scenario, from my perspective, is a way to sort of time your credit delivery and maybe hopefully beat your credit delivery, but obviously that implies we've had in the past some real difficulty getting the city to agree to temporary C of O. So I think that's something you have to work early on with your contractor to figure that out.
Yeah. A lot of that with bin selection also, do you Thompson, Drew, look at or work with your developers when it might be time to consider even up front when to defer credit delivery and talk about that, even though they maybe have multiple bins, you look to put options in the LPA. So.
Yeah, I think more and more experienced developers are looking at this and want to make sure that they're not put in a situation where there could be questioning of whether or not those units would qualify for credits in that year, and we've been in a position in several instances where we will actually price it in and tell the developer that we prefer to do a deferred credit delivery, and all of our partnership agreements make it very clear that credits are not to be delivered prior to a certain year. and we make sure that conversation is ongoing, and a mistake is not made, and the wrong box is not checked, in order to preserve the full amount of credits. And I think we're going to talk about the 2/3 of risk as well momentarily, that we want to avoid that at all costs.
Yeah, let me apologize for the microphones. To me, it sounds a little bit like we're on 6th Street listening to some club music going on, or kind of going in and out, so I apologize for that. But if you can't hear, just let us know. Yeah, and I don't want to labor the panel about a 2/3 rule, but that's really kind of one of the things we're kind of circling around outside of multiple issues. So you still want to run into an issue with having your project placed in service, 85% of it, in December 31st, and you have the remaining 15%, that's now subject to 2/3, and that can come upon you pretty quickly, and if you're not paying attention to it, so something that's important to watch. And by this time, your management company's involved, so as you know, the management company's kind of going down that road. Let's move on to like the next step, and this is kind of like an IKEA level of breakdown of how a project works. So construction drawings. So Scott, when do you engage the design professionals to move forward? I know at application time it's really just, here's some elevations, here's my unit mix, here's what I want to do, but now you really got to get them into the weeds and get you from schematic conceptual to development design. So
yeah, so I mean the first thing is typically an agency will reply with some comments on your design. In some cases, that might have been part of threshold response. You needed to make some adjustments. Those probably didn't flow necessarily through the same thought process you had prior to application. You also might have gotten less credits. I mean, a lot of states don't allocate the amount that you get. So right there's your first decision point. Do you need to redesign? How much value engineering is required? Thankfully, we're in a pretty good place with pricing right now that it's probably not as much of an issue, but we've certainly been, and depending on the soft funds available with that agency, you're expecting $1 million, you only got 500,000. Now what? So I think that's really the first point. Are there any large changes that you need to make to the project and still keep your promises in order to meet that budget? Then moving right into it, everyone kind of sits on their hands while the award is out there. The moment that award comes in, it's really launching the design team right away. And I personally am not a big fan of the design bid build. So we like to bring in the contractor as soon as possible. We'll, 9 times out of 10, we'll be submitting an application with the contractor involved. But even after application, we like to involve the contractor right away. And in some cases, we've even gone to a design build process where the contractor can lead the architectural efforts, and that's really to hit a number. But right away, I mean, you're just, as a developer, you're just trying to get the wheel spinning again because everyone was off doing their own thing. No one knows until award whether you're really going to get it.
Right.
Yeah, and I'd say one thing that we're seeing more and more of is, credit utilization, and a lot of agencies are really pushing that, and so and sometimes that's part of your tiebreaker or whatever that you promised to the agency. And sort of maintaining those promises, so that when you go back to the agency, you said you could build it for X and you were going to have a certain number of credits per foot. Is that really achievable? And I think that's where a lot of the work comes in after the fact, and with construction prices moving around the way that they have, I mean, that becomes very challenging, and making sure that you can still build the quality that everybody expects. But still keep it within those parameters. So I mean, that's just another, you just got to communicate early on that, and everybody work together to make sure that you're not going to trip up anything down the road.
And by this time, you're basically, from a developer side, you have to start, you pretty much have a architectural or a design team contract in place. To get them to kind of move forward on all this stuff. Drew, what do you guys kind of start taking a look at the design team's contract now, or do you kind of wait until things kind of
Yeah, we tend to we focus heavily on the budget side, on the numbers,
Okay.
and really want to make sure that those numbers are solid. And I think a lot of developers now are really concerned about where construction prices are and want to feel good about the costs. So I've found that that's where the emphasis has been, trying to get some sort of sub-pricing before focusing on the balance of the contract negotiations and the business terms. So we typically, that'll be the last item that we actually get, is a signed contract before we close a deal, oftentimes. So I think that's less important than the cost side of it.
Yeah. Thomas, you get anybody kind of showing up and saying, hey, look, we know that you're going to have some design level review. We'd like to bring you in early, or do you guys kind of, like as Drew said, kind of push them off and say, look, let's get this thing to a more seasoned level and take a look at it at that point?
Yeah, I mean, we love to get plans and specs and schedule values and everything as early as possible, because that is a longer lead time item as we're working through due diligence, because we're gonna, we've got internal engineers who sort of lead that process for us, but we work with third parties that are actually going out and doing the plan and cost reviews for us. So it can take some time on those reports, and then you want to have some cushion on the back end as well if there are comments or questions or changes. Specifically if you're doing a rehab project where they may find something in that process that nobody thought about, and or the replacement reserve analysis comes in and they're not doing a full gut rehab, and there may be some things that you're better off going ahead and doing now that you hadn't planned on doing, rather than have to plan for replacing some of these systems during the 15-year compliance period. So for that reason, the earlier the better. I mean, but we certainly want to start with something that's pretty well baked. So.
And Drew, that kind of opens the door up a little bit too, because that's that's getting to be more and more. You're starting to see a lot more ACK rehab type projects. I mean, new construction is still out there, but with that, I mean, you guys have some sensitivity to the amount of rehab that's going in per door. I mean, a lot of these deals, if I was a developer coming to you and say, look, this has been a LIHTC deal forever. I've spent a lot of time on this thing. It's well maintained. Are you still going to look at me and say, look, I need some substantial replacement in this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that really depends on the project location and the details of what the condition actually is. There is a threshold that typically wants to be seen around $30,000 a unit of minimum rehab. And that's oftentimes driven by just the general thought that anything less than that's going to just be patchwork. Investors want to feel like they're putting their money into a new property. But that said, if we're in a market, if this is going to be Dallas and you've got 5 banks that have desperate CRA need, there'll probably be some flexibility on that. However, if you're in a secondary or tertiary market, that number may end up being $40,000 or $50,000 to justify getting somebody to want to invest. But I do think that people have gotten a little more sophisticated, and I know that we have, where we're actually looking at the scope much more than the dollar amount. We have certainly done projects that are closer to $20,000 pretty rarely, but that would be because there simply is not enough money to spend to make it worthwhile.
I mean, so that's to Thomas's point. I think that's a really good thing to kind of pay attention to when you're looking at ACK rehab, and just make sure that your costs are appropriate, or that you're putting enough into it. So getting into the design stage early and making sure that your architect can kind of identify that stuff is going to be key, because that'll help satisfy a lot of issues going down the road. Scott, so you mentioned a little bit about doing design build, and pushing it to the contractor, which many contractors love the design build aspect, but if you talk to the driven by the contractor, the architect will tell you a different story.
Yeah. We've done it a lot of different ways, or I have in my tax credit career. You've kind of given the contractor the specs and said, give me a price, and you're kind of holding your actual budget to your vest, and then we've gone down the more design build. Here's the budget. This is what we're gonna build it for. Let's, and I think that's a strategic decision. What your firm's comfortable with, what the type of GCs are in the market. Some areas with not a lot of options. You might not have a lot of flexibility in how you do that. The other challenge we face is a contractor really knowing going into an application that they're just putting some numbers together to help you get it funded, and then using those were schematic, now these are real, as an excuse to kind of beef up the budget. I'm not saying that's necessarily as intentional as it may have just sounded, but and I think we're going to touch on cost containment, but it's really our biggest challenge is really keeping that budget and really, because you can't play it safe on all of your equity pricing at 5 cents lower than you can get. You can't do that really anymore, or it's not wise to do that anymore.
Or plan that you're going to get a better price.
So there's you build in some factors that and levers you can push up and down, but it's the cost factor that's really been challenging. Yeah. And then another, site work is also an item that we found is often underestimated until you actually get the surveys, talk to the city, know what you have to relocate. If you do, where utilities are, what the topography is, and really get into that. Site work is typically a budget buster, as I've seen.
Yeah, and uniquely in Texas, when you go over for that carryover package, if you have a significant change in your site work, you have to explain it. Plus, you have to go seek out accountants, calculations to show, that what's includable in basis and what's not, because some of it's attributable to building, but we won't have to get into that. But that's, site work is definitely something that folks don't pay a lot of attention to. You like thumbnail pass of the property, and they're like, yeah, that's what it ought to cost.
Yeah, you just see a flat site, and that's going to be easy, but it's not really.
Little did they know there's a nuclear, rocket facility underneath the property that you have to excavate out. On the contracts, one of the things that Scott had mentioned is about cost containment. We're starting to see a lot of state agencies, including Texas, try and find a model that allows them to make sure that your costs are reasonable. I think the latest was at a QAP meeting recently, and the latest discussion was, well, let's have a look back at previous application cycles. But in the same conversation, they talk about how everybody comes in at application time all at set price, right? And then at carryover or later on down the road, the price becomes $5 more, $10 more, that type of stuff. So we're kind of seeing that in the industry. You guys work pretty closely with the third-party contractor, and some folks have internal contractors. Where do you kind of see the discussion with the state agencies? I mean, are you
on the cost containment? Well, they're building these in their QAPs, and I've seen kind of two sides of the continuum. One is like it's a hard line if you can't go over this, and the other is they'll build some exceptions or waivers or alternative point mechanisms to get around that. Like, for example, Ohio had basically $190,000 a unit cap unless you got enough points in this certain area that you could bypass it, and that's at least it's manageable, because not every site that would be great for tax credit can hit those numbers that are just pulled out of a random averaging.
Right. And Thomas, I'm sure like I would come to you as a developer and say, hey, I got this application in, it's been awarded credits, I'm at $77 a square foot, here's what I got, what do you think? When you guys are giving like initial LOI or anything like that, do you guys look at the budget, or you just kind of go with what's there?
Yeah, we look at the budget, and we try to apply a reasonable standard to it, but we realize these things are not live yet, but we do. When we have, I had a call with a client today, and I was asking him about buyout, where he is sort of in the process, because we had a deal in a similar area. That everybody was sort of blown away that we came back and this other developer had just completed a deal, thought he had a good handle on where prices were, and when bids came back, he ended up like 18% higher than than he thought he was going to be, and he was had some pretty good information in the market. So we want to pass that along to our clients and say, hey, just heads up, I don't know where you are in the process here, but think about this as you're putting your budget together. So just again, communication and earlier the better on that. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and Drew, you guys obviously get involved when it comes to the contractor's contract and the strength of the builder itself. You can talk a little bit about that on really kind of how you want to get in and look at their kitchen and make sure that's in order.
Yeah, I mean, we have a group, our development risk management team, we call them DRMs, to really kind of dig into those details. And interestingly, I think a lot of the maybe weaker GCs that had been working in the past decade, many of them were sort of weeded out during the downturn. So today, I think there's less of a concern. Oftentimes, we'll find that whoever is brought to the table by our developer clients ends up being much stronger than we would have anticipated. Either someone that we've already have experience with, or if it's a new group, it may be somebody who has a tremendous amount of experience in the conventional multifamily sector and are getting into affordable. So we're seeing that bonding capacity and balance sheets are actually pretty strong today, better than they have been in the past. And I think it's part of that has to do with just consolidation in the industry, and maybe it's because tax credit pricing is so high that it's the pockets of the contractors that are being lined here. But as far as the review level of review, it's typically just limited to reputability, resume, making sure that we're comfortable with the number of projects that they've constructed of this type in these locations. One of the challenges that we've seen, particularly in West Texas, is being able to find subs. And do you have a GC that has experience having to bring in subs from other locations? Because we actually ran into a problem on a project last year where that was a real challenge, and we want to make sure that we have groups that know how to do that.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point.
Different types of issues that have been coming up.
Yeah, and Thomas, we talked a little bit about bonding, payment performance bonds, and then also subcontractor bonds, that type of stuff. Are you seeing any kind of like alternatives to that? I mean, are you getting approached by folks saying, I like to do a letter of credit rather than a bond?
Yeah, every now and then somebody would prefer to post a letter of credit rather than the bond. We've seen so much FHA financing. I'd say most everybody's just going ahead and bonding. Every now and then you'll have maybe a related party GC. If you've got a really strong sponsor, you may be able to get around some bonding requirements. If they're personally, they're already on the hook, right? And they're personally guaranteeing these things. But typically, I think you're seeing just your standard kind of bonding on deals. So.
Yeah, and I know a lot of folks kind of just look at it separate, and they're saying, well, this is just a requirement of my investor or my construction lender that I have, PNP bond, some sort of surety to do that coverage, and then they start dealing with the contractor, not taking into account where the subs are going to be, like you said. And really, when you're hiring a general contractor, you're hiring a general contractor that's probably going to be good about the delivery and the management of the project. It's the subcontractors that are the boots on the ground. So really kind of, making sure that you have that, subcontractor due diligence is what's key too. So I think that was a great point.
Yeah, as Drew said, I mean, that's one of the first things we talk to, the GC about is, hey, have you done a project in this area? And, what are your expectations? Are you going to try to bring your subs with you? Or are you going to try to find new subs? Because, we've had, some hiccups there on projects where, we have very capable general partners, and they've gotten into, you mentioned West Texas, you get into an area where you're not familiar, and you don't know a lot of folks, and you just think, hey, they'll show up. Well, that's not always the case. So
yeah,
that's much more important, I would say, than the financial considerations
Yeah.
is really those relationships and experience.
Or you get guys like me who thinks he's Bob Vila with a hammer and some nails, and I'm ready to go build something. So that's,
Well, we would waive our bonding requirements if you were our guy there.
there you go. So all I need is some overalls.
Personal guarantee from Quinn, that's all we need.
All right, so let's move on from the construction contract and talk a little bit about the development services agreement, which is a really important document, by the way, because it really kind of charts a path on multiple things. Most importantly, to probably Scott would echo this, the developer fee that you're going to get out of this. So what are some of the elements, that you see in a development service agreement? Scott, you.
Sure. Obviously, the role of the developer, and we have been in situations where we have co-developers and consultants involved, so those things need to be pretty spelled out and very transparent. Developer fees, obviously something it's important, and the schedule of payments in that developer fee. Kind of how the expectation of payment. There's a lot of sources in a lot of these deals, and what exactly and when all that occurs is important. Deferred fee, of course, is another thing. We're seeing less, I think across the board, probably less deferred fees than historically because of where pricing is, but still a lot of, but then, developers like myself will find that, that deal that we couldn't do before, now you do it, and there is some deferred fee in there. So, that's an important piece, and
yeah.
Not knowing that you can rely on that future cash flow as a developer is important.
Yeah, and I just put a little cautionary tale too. I mean, the developer fee, the deferral or the reduction in deferral, a lot of people look at it as, well, the developer fee is walking away with a pretty good surplus of cash, but Drew, you guys are kind of looking at it as that's the last bastion of hope if there's a problem. Obviously there's contingency that's built into that, but it's not necessarily just because you see it on paper there's not a deferral doesn't mean that it's not accounted for in some shape or form. So can you add a little bit, perm loan sizing, that type of stuff?
Yeah, I think that's actually an area where we've softened a little bit as an industry, where historically that's always been looked at as the first and last line of defense to a degree is the developer fee holdback on a transaction. That's really the only money that we can look to hold a developer's feet to the fire or kind of use as a form of collateral to bring everyone to the table to make sure that we're discussing and in agreement about how to proceed if there are issues that occur. But the flip side of this coin, which I think is an argument that's beginning to resonate more, is that we also want the developer to have the money in their pocket available to use. So by and as on the acquisition side, it's an argument that we try to make to our credit people and to the banks, who tend to be a little more onerous about the release of fee, is that by actually paying that out, you're giving the developer more resources to work with, and whether that's working capital on new projects or just the ability to prop up their balance sheet a little bit. So I have seen a little bit of a changing of the tide in that regard, that there is a benefit to be seen by actually paying it out sooner.
No, that's actually great to hear, because we look at we talked a little bit during the construction contract about the payment performance bond issue, right? And when you have to call on that payment performance bond, it's a nightmare. It's not like that's the be-all fixture of the problem.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just want, as the limited partner, you want the developer to remedy the situation. So it gives them that kind of ability.
And actually, there have been a few instances where we've worked with nonprofits that have very small balance sheets, and we have only been able to satisfy the net worth and liquidity requirements by increasing the amount of developer fee that we paid to them at closing, to show that they actually had the cash to support the requirements that our investor had. So
cool.
Yeah.
I know my tax guys love that stuff. So Thomas, you typically see, we talked a little bit about deferred developer fee, which obviously it's got some trickiness to navigate over the 15-year period, when it's paid, how it's paid, so on and so forth. Are you seeing a lean towards promissory notes when you first structure those, or do those come in at a later date?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. When we're looking at deferred fee, obviously one of the things we have to demonstrate to get a tax opinion is that deferred fee can reasonably be, that there's a reasonable expectation that the fee will be paid back over the compliance period. And so that's one of the first things we do, when we're looking at it, just to make sure we're not going to have to take anything out of basis, because that's the last thing anybody wants to do. So we usually get pretty creative when it comes to those type analysis. But yeah, I mean, I would say it's across the board. And if you can support, if you could support putting an interest rate, onto a developer fee, and that can help your yield a little bit. And so, but again, it's just all it's deal by deal. I would say.
Yeah. And strength of the sponsor and stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we're kind of moving. We'll move into like the 10%, 50% test, 10% for competitive 9% deals, and 50%. If you really don't care to hear anything about that, we'll move along to something else.
We talked about carryover a fair amount, so
yeah,
there's a lot of crossover. So
yeah, I think it's good to kind of talk about some strategies. And Scott, I know you kind of worked on some of that recently, so it might be good.
I can throw an example out there, and we can critique it for. So this happens to be an example in Arizona. We were coming up on the 10% test without having closed. Sometimes we're at least fortunate enough to typically be able to close on land before, and that really puts us over on the 10% test if we need to. So that's kind of our plan B. Plan A is obviously close and you're on your way, you're spending money. Plan B, close on the land. Well, in this case, we had to move to Plan C, which was material storage, and we couldn't close on the land because the city was delayed in their EI review. So we were prevented from closing on the land. So we really had to basically scramble, get our GC in there, really get our accountant in there, who happened to be Quinn, and dig in and figure out a way to meet that 10% task. We did that with a number of things. We went ahead and paid design fees. I think we paid for some pre-construction. We had some lumber packages stored. I mean, it was really, it's happened I've experienced this a few times. It's not that uncommon, I don't think.
Yeah.
But and it happens. But it was really challenging, and we had to work with the finance agency to make sure they knew what we were doing, and they approved it all. So it was, and obviously with the deadline looming at all stages. So
I think what was kind of unique about the deal was and it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the when do you engage the contractor and have that discussion with the contractor, and that bringing them in early and for budgeting standpoint, but putting them on the front end and making them manage the architect and the design to drive to budget is key. But one of the things that you guys had done, which I thought is kind of an interesting way of going about doing it, is utilizing, typically all those contracts are AIA, American Institute of Architect driven kind of contracts. Everybody's standards, they know them, that type of stuff. But you guys utilized the contract that had pre-construction services to it, which allowed, for identification of what was going to be done prior to, which I know was important to kind of lean on to kind of help meet the test. So that's when you're thinking that I'm going to do this because it's going to add some benefit in driving budget, it also turns around and helps you in the back end, some place that you weren't really thinking about. So those are things that are good. And talking to Drew and Thomas and his team about what they're doing can also add some things. So have you guys seen any unique 10% approaches?
That's pretty much been that's a really good example of kind of the creativity that we had to get to with the material storage and all that.
I mean, and the service has gotten pretty it's gotten pretty cut and tight on what you can and cannot do. So the creativity, the excessive creativity, I think has kind of gone away. All right, 50% test is really a bond test. So we talked about the 10% test. So the 50% test leans towards the bonds, and how much of the bonds are going to go towards paying for actual good type of costs. There's a couple other analysis that have to take place for bonds, but this really kind of triggers. How do you guys, Drew and Thomas, how do you guys look at the 50% test? Do you guys get in kind of up front, or you just wait for the tax council's opinion and you kind of go from there?
No, I mean, we try to get in up front, and again, just make sure that we've got enough cushion in there. I mean, we don't want to, have our first, look at the 50% test, say, okay, we're at 50,
Yeah.
50.5%, so yeah, we're good to go.
Yeah.
Because things move around, and so you want to have a little cushion in there in the beginning, and an expectation of where you might be stressed, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I would say that would probably be the main thing there.
Yeah, and it's a good plan on both of those, the 10%, the 50% test, because they really are you don't meet those, you just don't, you're just not getting it.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
So not being at 10 or 10.2 or 50.1 is an issue. So it's really important to kind of pay close attention to that. One of the things I like to do is really kind of manage a flow of funds. There's like a gazillion. Scott, there's like a gazillion ways and methodologies people come to the table and say, this is what my construction interest is going to be, which is such a big part of basis calculation, right? So, and there's rules of thumb and this and that. I get a little bit more down in the weeds and do just a full-on spread and project out. What do you guys normally kind of do when you're looking at it?
Yeah, typically the flow of funds is pretty high level going into application, then you're digging in. As a developer, we start with what we want, and then it's a negotiation, and we end up with what we need, hopefully, for the project. So, I think we try to, get some of our fee in there, up front, more than we have in the past, but also we understand, the needs of our investors, and, it's really, equity can be such a commodity. We really try hard as a developer not to push for every penny and constantly beat our partners over the heads on, well, this person's going to give me another penny. We really try to build consistent partners for deal execution, and we think over the long haul that's gonna help. With our track record of success. So, I'd like to say we're pretty flexible on that. Again, we ask for what we want, we end up with what we need.
Yeah. And Thomas, do you guys do your own kind of flow of funds when you're looking at the deal? And
Yeah, we do. We have a couple of different runs that we do just to make sure that, timing of sources and uses, when we structure a deal, again, we typically start with the developer's numbers and what he's asking for, if there's a preferred pay-in of capital. And, sometimes, they want a bridge, sometimes they'd rather not. And so we sort of follow their lead, but then we also want to make sure that, we're on the same page as to when sources are available and when they're going to be needed. So, and that's refined, through the due diligence process. I mean, we start out with our assumptions, and then we refine those as the timing comes through, just to make sure that nobody's caught off guard there.
yeah. Drew, we may talk about this a little bit more in a few minutes, but with the price of construction debt right now being where it is, and there seems to be kind of through the industry, a pushback of equity when it's coming in. What are some of the nuances there? Are you seeing the lender saying you got to put at least this much in during construction? And do you ever run into like LTV issues where, or think about that when you're looking at it?
Yeah, no, that's good question. So I think everyone's experienced that with the ability to borrow at such low rates, that deferral of equity is both cost effective because you're able to, you're borrowing at a cheaper rate than the cost of your equity. So by deferring that, you're able to increase and get better pricing, which is actually a pretty big driver of why equity pricing is where it is. I mean, it accounts for several pennies of the value that we're able to put into the projects. And that's simply because rates are so low. We have seen that there are some investors that have a requirement where a minimum of 15% they want to see in at the closing, and then oftentimes a little more during construction. In the multi-investor fund space, where there's a lot more discretion, usually 10% will suffice, and it's part of it's a skin in the game type of piece. And some part of it is the developers just, they want to have that equity in early. On the CPI side, it certainly it makes for almost a simpler analysis too, with rates being so low, where there's a lot less margin for error, more margin for error, I guess, if you're slightly off and you end up having under budgeting. The good thing is a syndicator, the banks always end up being the bad guys on this. So we do a detailed calculation, and we'll always find that that the construction lenders have requirements, or mostly have requirements for several months of additional construction period interest reserves that they're looking for. So we get to be the good guys.
Yeah, and you'll especially see that on as some agencies have created long-term bridging, where they'll bridge out for 5 years or whatever, or even not that extreme in some cases, where you've just got to, your construction lender / perm lender is willing to bridge out a little bit more to try to juice the credit pricing. As Drew said, they're probably a lot more conservative as far as allowing cash flow from operations to be used to offset interest. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, as you're putting this together, is are you going to have to fund a significant reserve, and is it really worth it to take some of this long-term bridging if you're going to have to park that money for a long period of time? Maybe you're better off taking a little bit lower credit price and and seeing your fee paid sooner.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I think that ends up being sort of disguised deferred fee, where it's really, you've got several $100,000 in your budget that is not going to be needed, and because you'll have cash flow from operations that'll be able to cover those dollars amount. So again, just the banks get to pad their deals for their credit committees a little bit more.
Yeah, it makes them look safe, but as you said, it definitely, you got to pay attention to the origination costs for all that. So it's pretty good. So moving on to one of my favorite documents is the LPA. So this is really kind of where the rubber meets the road. So
have you ever read one?
One too many.
Yeah, we were talking about this the other day. I think we're going to start making requirements of the limited partners to make sure that you do the LPAs and wingdings. We'll have like certain font requirements. So it's gonna be like coded LPA. So we're talking about limited partnership agreement, and I apologize too because we threw out a couple acronyms there that I kind of caught. So LTV is loan to value. So in the construction lender world, when they start looking at this stuff, the thing you got to be careful you don't get tripped up about is that you have drawn out more of your construction loan than what's necessary. So what we're talking about is up front, pricing the deal, structuring the deal, what's in basis from your interest reserve and what's not. You really should get down in the weeds by the end of the day. You may not need to do that up front, but get into the weeds at the end of the day, because what you don't want to have happen is be in the towards the end of construction and then find out you've drawn too much of your construction loan out, and you got a lot of space between when the next equity installment is going to come into play. That'll cause a nightmare of issues. So you really kind of want to do a good analysis on that. I know some folks kind of just run caution to the wind and they use a rule of thumb and they just kind of go with that, but you will run into some big issues that are tough to solve at the end of the day. On the LPA, Drew, are there important agreements that go along with the limited partnership agreement?
Yeah, so all the exhibits that are attached, development services agreements, the guarantee, I think, is probably the biggest one that really is an added document. And from my standpoint, those are the two items that I focus on most. The guarantee side, I think it's become pretty industry standard that you've got your. You want me to talk about the guarantees?
Yeah, I was going to say you talked about earlier about me guaranteeing, and I have the pleasure of having a net worth of a 1991 Toyota Corolla. So I'd like to hear more about how you do these guarantees. It's
been broken down pretty simply, and I think anyone in here that's closed a deal has probably seen it exactly the same way. That you have really the most important is getting this project complete. So your unlimited construction completion guarantee, and then a period during the operations that we consider to be the most sensitive, kind of post-stabilization, making sure that the property is clearly going to perform well in the market, anywhere between 3 and 5 years, depending on certain risk factors for your operating deficit period, and that'll pretty standard. That's capped at 6 months of your operating expenses, reserves, and debt service. And then thereafter, just the risk of recapture of credits. And that will be for the rest of the compliance period, and with various kind of ways of backstopping it, either unlimited kind of cash out of pocket. Sometimes certain, particularly nonprofits, can get a cap on that to just the amount of their developer fee for their exposure. But it pretty much comes down to that. And I think there's a lot of comfort now that the compliance side, really the only risk of recapture is compliance error. So a lot more comfort, and obviously indicative of why pricing is so high, that it's clearly a comfortable product, that performance is pretty much guaranteed.
Yeah. And Thomas, obviously the LPA outlines, the benefits and, the contributions that are going to be made, but the expectation of benefits, can you kind of outline a little bit about, what are the pay-in schedules look like, and typically what you run into, and then also what your expectations are?
Sure, and it depends, I would say, as far as the pay-in benchmarks, it's, again, going to depend on what type of project it is and what type of financing you're using. If you do have a bridge loan that's bridging in most of the equity, but I would say standard, you're going to see a percentage, 10 to maybe 25% of the equity coming in at admission, just to get things started. You pay some developer fee. And you're either going to have certain construction benchmarks where, at 25% complete, there's going to be another slug of equity that comes in, or in a case where you're bridging, you're using a construction loan primarily for completing, you're gonna see most of the equity back-ended to construction or completion, or later is when that's going to come in. But we're all across the board there. I've worked on some projects recently that are really rapid rehabs and kind of small properties that have been pooled together, and really they call capital as they need it, because we know, we sort of have an expectation of how quickly these things are going to go. It may take them 3 months to turn one of these RD deals, and the last thing you want to do is tie up your partner when they're trying to burn through these.
Yep.
With, hey, let's calculate what does 75% completion mean on one of these properties. So it really is. I don't know that there's really a standard anymore. I think it just sort of depends on what the project needs and what the schedule is.
Scott, you've been over there for a little bit, so on those delivery requirements, you get a lot of pressure from like these guys that say, hey, look, I need you to give me a set schedule of what you're delivering in credits and what you're delivering in losses.
Yeah, exactly. So what we know is in the LPA is a projection, and while we would love to be exact, we know the only thing that's true is that it won't be exactly what you projected, especially in a new construction scenario. For example, in the Midwest, I think we're facing 40 to 50 days average per project of rain delays. It's been a wet season for us there. So we try to be as accurate as we can. Of course, we set up the bins accordingly. But what's happening? We try to be conservative in the delivery scheduling it over a period of 5 to 8 months, depending on the market. Luckily, in our business, when it comes down to it, a couple months late on the first credit, you can typically make that up through lease up on the others. There's, I can't remember a lease up that has taken more than 4 months in the last 3-4 years. So.
Yeah. And there's obviously, if you don't hit those benchmarks, there's adjusters for doing that. So
Yeah, and we, that's again, working with your partners, repeat delivery, making sure they know where you're at, and if you do your best to get that down, there's some give and take both on the adjuster in your favor as a developer and the downward adjusters. So.
yeah, and when I'm talking about adjusters, sitting on that side of the table, a lot of times you hear the conversation about adjusters. You need to pay close attention to those. But literally, what we're talking about is what happens with the investor managing the return of the deal, and so it's not a dollar for dollar, give back kind of thing. So you got to pay close attention to meeting those deadlines. So you don't run into that. Since we're talking about the general partner, what are you typically? What's your role, and how does the LPA kind of spell that out to you? They're like,
for
Scott,
me,
just
yeah,
do it, man.
Yes, for me, I've got the benefit of in-house counsel and really to guide me to the point where I can't mess it up. I mean, I've been on development teams, of course not my fault, but where the LPAs are messed up, where that credit delivery to start was 3 months off, and that was a bad situation. You walk in already knowing you're going to have an adjuster, and you're just in a state of stress for 12 to 14 months while this thing's under construction. So for me, it's having having eyes on it beyond me, because I've got too many of these in front of me to look and make sure we need backup so I don't mess up.
So I mean, at the end of the day, you have roles and responsibilities as the GP moving through the deal. And if I'm your asset management syndication partner, taking the role of that, but acting for the limited partner, and I showed up on the site and said, I don't like your windows, you're going to chase me off the property?
No, we roll out the red carpet for our investors. No, we're very used to monthly visits by multiple investors, and that we time it as such, and they're involved, and we're all in the same room when we go through the contractor meetings, and so it's a pretty low stress process when everyone's on board, even when there's delays, and everyone's clear about why there are delays. It's not to owners.
So Drew, you're not, the GP comes in, you're not giving them the keys to the Ferrari. I mean, what do you guys look at? What are the limitations of the general partner that you guys kind of?
Well, I mean, we try to make it pretty simple. The general partner's responsibilities are to operate the project and ensure that it performs and ensure that we receive our tax credits, and it pretty much comes down to that. And then the expectation is that there won't be any acts that we are unaware of that are a material change to the structure of the transaction. So limitations on withdrawals from replacement reserve accounts, to dollar amounts that would be reasonable for the project size. Certainly no replacement of any partners without consent. Obviously they can't sell the project. So it's really stuff that I think is pretty obvious for the most part. So the conversations and the negotiations of the LPA don't tend to really get to that level, though attorneys now are looking for more things to negotiate. So I think that some of the stuff is coming up more than it had in the past, but it's all about being reasonable.
Yeah, and I would say most of the LPAs that I've seen, there's a clear line of, here's what you cannot do. Yeah. Right. And Thomas, so the investor has rights too. I mean, you're basically coming in and managing the deal. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, Drew touched on it. I mean, certainly, we want to be involved with major decisions. I mean, we're certainly the last thing we want to do is micromanage the partnership, but we have, fiduciary responsibilities to our investors at the upper tier. So we want to be involved when you want to replace a partner, or you want to refinance, or you may want to sell, or whatever those sort of big ticket items are. But the day-to-day stuff, I mean, we want to sort of stay out of the way and let our partners do what they do best. I mean, that's the reason we're in the deal, and because we trust them, and that's really what our role is. Going forward is that they have that expectation of operating the property, delivering the benefits that we all signed up for, and then coming to us when things aren't headed in the right direction, and everybody sit down at the table and figure out the best way to get it back on track. So.
And Scott, the LPA outlines, the benefits that both parties are going to share, particularly with the waterfall cash flow. Yeah. Sometimes I look at it, if from wearing a developer hat and looking at the LPA, I'm like, these guys are going to soak up all my cash. What is this all about? But generally, there's provisions in there about what the GP gets or the developer gets, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we deal with some pretty complex waterfalls. I try to control what I can control, and the asset management fees, accounting, and those sorts of things. Those have to be baked into every deal, and we know. And on the underwriting side, on our side, we know to build those in. A recent example of a complication in the cash flow was after award, a project. Had some city home funds. The city, while it's a soft loan, they're a bit. They want their money back, and they want 2% interest, and they want 50% of cash flow. So now it's a complete negotiation. We have our deferred fee that we want to pay back, plus we have these other flow of funds. So and then it just gets to be it's complicated. It can be complicated. This doesn't have that many sources of funds, and I know stacks with 8 to 10 sources of funds in there, it gets very difficult. So I think identifying the waterfall, certainly if there's partners, we often have housing authority or nonprofit partners that get a portion of that cash flow. So working through that, those can get complicated. I mean, we've got really complex waterfalls that we just have to be accurate in the LPA.
Yeah. And yeah, we're making it, man. We're gonna make it. Hopefully, we're keeping this lively for you guys. LPAs are always so much fun to talk about.
We are standing in between everybody and cocktail hours. So
yeah.
Not a good place to be. We'll buy everybody a drink at the reception.
You know what? What you have to do is you got to give your card to Mike in the back. I'll send you a drink. What's the true life cycle reporting requirements?
Try to keep it pretty simple. We will look for monthly financial statements for you guys on the property level. We have to do quarterly reporting to our investors, so it's important that we get those, and I think that's pretty standard. And then the balance of requirements would be at an annual basis, both just updates for the guarantor financials and then the property level, and then obviously projected budget for the following year. And I think that's pretty standard.
Yeah. Well,
the negotiations tend to come down to when those annual requirements are due. And, we're always looking for less time. You guys are always looking for more time, and hopefully we meet in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, and then the deal's signed, and you get Harry and David baskets, and then there's hugs, and it's good to go.
Harry and David baskets.
No, so I just want to open it up to any questions. It's about 4:43, so we got a couple minutes. If there's anybody that has anything, if you're here for the RAD panel, I hope you really got a lot out of this one. But other than that, thank you so much for coming, and look forward to seeing you guys out at networking reception. So, thanks to the panel too, by the way. It was a good job.